Carlos, one of the main things I wanted to ask you first of all was, you know, when I started reading about you, I kind of wanted to wonder and to ask, where did you kind of start within your filmmaking journey? I think a lot of filmmakers come from all over the place and they start for a bunch of different reasons. And I wanted to ask, like, what kind of sparked you to get inside the realm of filmmaking? Of
Mm, well, first let me introduce myself. Hi,
course.
hi, my name is Carlos Corral. I'm the artistic director of the El Paso Film Festival. And let's see, where did the spark start? I wanted to say the filmmaking spark started in high school.
Mm.
I had a lot of friends who were also into filmmaking, and it turns out our English teacher would allow us to turn in short films as our homework assignments. So we gave our own renditions of like Beowulf, Archetypes, Brave New World, and that's kind of where I discovered filmmaking. But I mean, I'd always done home movies with my family prior to that. And then I went to the University of Texas at Austin. I started out as a computer science major, but then found that there was a film major, and I transferred over there, and I've just kind of been a filmmaker ever since.
It's so interesting too because I feel like, you meet tons of people who say that they've been wanting to make movies or write scripts since they've been in, since they were a kid. But I feel like, it's also interesting to see people who maybe got into it later in life. Like I didn't get into filmmaking as well until I was in high school. And I kind of wonder, going to film school, I wonder how that, because I can relate to, because I wasn't a film major at first either. I was a music major, and so I kind of wonder like, what was that decision to kind of like really see film as something that you could make a career out of? Because often we see it as more of a passion than a profession.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say times have changed. Obviously, we're definitely a lot more online now. But when I was in college, about almost 22, 23 years ago, it was still a tough industry to break into. Uh, but I feel that like the filmmaking thing kind of also comes from watching movies. It's not just wanting to create it; it's also appreciating it and just loving movies. I've always loved movies as a kid. I love going to the movies. I love watching several favorite films, and even when I was in college, I would still watch movies with all my friends, and we would always try to like take influence from a lot of our favorite movies. So yeah, I mean, I think part of it is that people tend to fall in love with the story process. It's being creative and also kind of trying to achieve, the technical means on how to best communicate your story. Of course, me being one of those where I feel story and sound are the priority.
Yeah.
and and yeah, it's just one of those things that you the people you surround yourself with, if they're filmmakers too and they're watching movies and they're making movies and you guys are making movies together, you guys will definitely go places because filmmaking is a collaborative effort. It's not just one person. It takes a team of people, and by team I just mean like, yeah, we can all be the rebel without a crew like Raul Rodriguez, but even he had
Yeah.
a sort of friends, cast, people who were all there for him. It's always good to have like a good foundation of friends and family that are gonna tell you to pursue your creative your creative career.
Yeah, and speaking of a creative career, I was getting interested in this, reading more about you, but you've done a lot of roles within filmmaking, directing, producing, editing, location, sound mixer, and I kind of wonder like what led you to get into those roles, especially being a sound mixer. Sound is something I think even nowadays within the modern lens of filmmaking still is not thought about as much, but really it should be. And so I kind of wonder, what led you to getting such a vital role?
Uh, yeah, a lot of times, the sound maybe doesn't feel sexy like all the other
Yeah.
positions, like director, producer, writer, because that's more where their creativity is. But even location sound mixers, and I also, do post production as well. That's been really interesting because there is a lot of creativity that sometimes people don't realize goes into it. It's people forgive bad picture, not bad sound, and it's It's if sound is always good, no one realizes it's there, then they start to critique more your story, your cinematography, all these other things. But if the sound's bad, then all of a sudden everything is bad in the movie. But the way I kind of got on set, when I was in college is number one, being very tall. I'm 6'2", and sound always seemed to be the position that nobody wanted. But I wanted to get on set and I wanted to make friends and I wanted to learn like, okay, what's everyone doing? Okay, call time, call sheets, get everyone here, feed everybody, compose shots, so I'm watching and all I had to do was hold the, microphone in the air and say, okay, point it at the actor. And I'm like, okay, what are we doing? Okay, I need to follow along. And, of course, having good ears is like, okay, obviously I know when it sounds bad. So I always have to make sure the mic is pointed at the actor. But you'd be surprised. A lot of people feel like they don't have to do that. Like that's kind of the things I have in Sound One, where I'm a professor now at New Mexico State University. We teach in the Creative Media Institute, and sometimes part of the exercises is just asking students, do you ever actually listen to your environment, and do you listen to what good sound is versus bad sound? Uh, I feel like your generation had something unique where you experienced the pandemic and kind of like what we're doing now. We had Zoom calls and Zoom classes, and I was asked the question, how many of your professors or instructors or teachers actually had good sound when they were teaching you? And did you even
Mm.
absorb any of the information? And a lot of my students were like, no, like they had terrible sound. We couldn't hear them. And like, okay, why didn't you guys say anything? They just didn't care. And so that's
Yeah.
why I'm like, okay, so that's another thing that I always tell people. If you have bad sound, no one's going to care about your movie, let alone your presentation.
Yeah. And I also wonder, as, time has gone on and as technology has changed, what do you think you've noticed the most change within sound editing and sound mixing and sound recording within film?
um Something I talk about with and my students is there's a lot that's changed in the realm of sound. In the if you go back in the 1980s and 90s, dialogue sound especially is very high priority. Yeah, I feel like movies that were made in the 80s and 90s, you don't need to turn on the subtitles like we do today, because dialogue's always a priority. Now, we've got a new generation of filmmakers that sometimes are doing huge things that are like, big sound mixes, big everything, but then they're not really focusing on the dialogue so much. So then, something we talk about in the class is something called the Nolan effect, where the music and the sound effects are way overpowering the dialogue and we can't hear the dialogue. And but then Christopher Nolan says, well, I only mix my movies for theatrical release, not for your home theater or your TV or your iPhone. So then there's no real attention that's put back into it, because that's the other thing too. That in post-production sound, now that we have so much distribution, it used to be that we go to the movie theater and that was a certain audio mix, and then the home theater, that's we only had like a little bit. We had bigger speakers, bigger TVs, but now like we have home theaters, now we have iPhones, now we have iPads, now we have laptops. So like everything just sounds different because every company uses different quality parts. So it's never going to be the same exact mix that we hear that was originally in the theater. It's kind of a strange melding of it all, and we have to rely on that. So we sometimes we don't know if we're hearing good sound or not. So that's what I try to teach my students into discerning. But then also when they mix with headphones or they're mixing with speakers in a lab, they have to discern what is good audio, what is good dialogue. And sometimes it's a lot more complex than you might think.
Yeah, and speaking of, getting into the lab, I wonder like what is the first thing that you start teaching your students when it comes to sound mixing and sound recording, especially when it comes to film, because sound can be such a daunting and a difficult thing to get into when it comes to filmmaking because it's such a you don't think about sound until you actually start becoming a filmmaker. And so what's like some of the first things you start to do when you have students coming in for filmmaking when it comes to sound?
Yeah, I mean, we start off with location sound first and foremost, and then the next half of the semester is post production sound. But it's trying to develop a reason why you need to pay attention to it, because without it, you've only got pretty pictures.
Yeah.
There's really nothing like sound that, because I always say sound shapes our reality, and without it, we're kind of subject to not understanding our surroundings. So that's one of the first things I teach them. And then the other thing I also teach them is that a lot of times, I'll even show them movie clips from old movies or big blockbusters. But the thing is that I always try to show them from the 80s and the 90s, because now my students, are at an age where, they weren't alive when a lot of these movies happen. One of the very first films I show in our post lab that we have, because it's a 5.1 setup, but it's like, we rigged it to feel theatrical. And the first clip I show is the T-Rex scene in Jurassic Park in
Mhm.
1993. And I've asked them, have you guys seen this movie? And they said, yeah, we've all seen Jurassic Park, the first one. I said, okay, great. Have you felt Jurassic Park? So that's when I show them that whole scene, but they listen to it in 5.1. And to them, it's like, whoa. And then
Yeah.
after that, I move on and I show them like what was the one sound effect or sound mix that defined your childhood. For me at the time, when I grew up, I went to go see Ghostbusters 2 in the
Mhm.
theater. And for me, the proton pack, because I used to watch the cartoon, the real Ghostbusters, and then watching the real movie, I was like, oh my God, it's real. Like,
Yeah.
it's all real, at least that's how I felt when I was a kid. And then, but even showing them clips from that and listening to it in 5.1, even they're like, wow, like our adrenaline is like way up. It's like, yes, because you're feeling like the emotion, you're feeling the sound. And that's the thing, is that so much emotional undertone is carried in sound, that you don't realize that your brain is kind of like it's making you feel like you're there. The pictures are great, you're watching cinematography and everything, but sound is what's putting you in there, where you start to feel like, hey, do you feel like you're in Jurassic Park? Do you feel like you're in the courtroom scene when the Scoleri brothers pop out? Like little things like that. And as I go on through the semester, I show them all specific movies and clips from that time, because yeah, a lot of it now, they do go to the movie theaters now sometimes, but not all the time. But they weren't around when all these classic films were out in the movie theater. So that's something that I feel that my generation got to experience. But with the advent of technology and streaming and everything, that's just, people don't go to the movies as much anymore. That's kind of the other thing too. For us, it was like, hey, what's there to do on Saturday? Well, let's go to the movies again. Well, let's go to the movies again. What's playing? What's playing? We would always try to go and do something, because we didn't have Netflix at home at the power of our fingertips. Like, what's on? What can I pick? So but yeah, going that into that. And then of course we move into post production, where I show them, okay, your job as a location sound mixer is to protect the dialogue, because that's the story. And now that we're there, now we need to shape the reality. We need to shape the story. Um, we kind of have an idea of where we were when we filmed this, but now let's start to fill in the holes and start to fill in the subtle details. And I think that's what sometimes people don't understand, is that everything you're hearing sometimes in movies, you think, oh, that's how naturally that place sounds. And it's like, no, actually it doesn't. There's a lot of different elements that go into shaping an entire atmosphere when it comes to a sound in a scene or in a movie in general.
Yeah, I mean that's a perfect way to put it because I often find myself, when I do sound assignments or even when I do sound for my own things, I often see it as a big puzzle that I don't know what needs to go there, but you just have to, it's trial and error. And one thing I wonder too is that I wonder, within teaching post sound and sound mixing and recording, I wonder if you teach students a difference between narrative filmmaking sound and documentary sound. And I wonder if there is a difference. And if so, what do you teach students?
Yeah, there actually is a very huge difference. This might sound odd, but a lot of times for post sound and narrative, yeah, you can be creative, but we're always trying to discern whether or not things are stylistic or realistic. And then we also dissect, diegetic and non-diegetic sound and what goes into a scene. So like, I compare like Quentin Tarantino movies. Are those realistic or stylistic? Because sometimes we hear some bizarre sound effects, especially like in Kill Bill, but then a lot of it sounds realistic because of, how much and I always say it's a fun thing, like there's always so much violence in Quentin Tarantino movies, but
Yeah.
that's like the fun part of it. Like the violence can sometimes be realistic or it can sound very stylistic. It just depends, but sometimes it blurs the line with the two of them.
Mm.
And then, but then for documentaries, it's really interesting because I've done documentary sound mixing, and a lot of times, and some people may disagree with this philosophy, but a lot of times documentary is sometimes manufactured completely.
Mm.
There have been documentaries I've done where all they got were interviews, and they didn't have time to go film certain things. I remember there's actually a documentary I did mix called if you can look it up on YouTube, it's called GoPro, the Ocean Cleanup Initiative.
Okay.
So that was something that we did with GoPro, but it was shot entirely on GoPros. And then the main interviews were filmed, with a GoPro, but then with a separate recorder, like an H4n or something like that. But that's it. Everything else, it's all GoPro shots. And the thing is that GoPros don't record very good audio. Um, so in order for it to sound emotionally real, I had to construct about 90% of the entire soundscape of it, but
Mm.
still mix it in a way that felt like you're watching a documentary and this is what things really sound like. So, especially because we're in the ocean, there's garbage that they're cleaning up. There's boats, there's nets, like there's so many elements that go into an ocean. And I remember every single shot has a specific composition of how real it can sound, but I also have to make sure it doesn't sound fake. So it's a strange way where narrative sound can be a little, we can play with the rules a little bit, especially like in sci-fi movies.
Yeah.
But when it comes to documentary, we are kind of we can't do that. We have to stick to reality, and we have to know what reality sounds like. So and actually, it's one of those things now where a lot of tools are coming out where sometimes you can use generative AI to generate sound effects, and yet somehow for me those don't feel real
Mm.
because the library of sound effects that we have, that I did this documentary with, like these were actual like recordings made at locations, in the ocean, by the beach, all certain things. So to me, they feel and sound real. But then when you have AI generate them, there's just something, I don't know. It's maybe not quite right, but again, that's me because of my own sound experience. But maybe to someone like you who's younger, let me ask you real quick: have you ever been to the beach or on a boat in the ocean? Kind of.
I I have been, and I've never actually used one of those AI tools to create generative audio. And I
No,
actually have no idea what they sound like, and I kind of wonder like what it is because I think it could be hard to describe why it feels fake and not like a good thing to use. But I think it's just one of the things that you just feel, you know?
yeah, but then again, there's so many AI videos now, especially on social media, and you're just like, wait, was that real? Like,
Yeah,
did I watch what was real?
yeah.
So yeah, that can be kind of the biggest difference, and that's why, um, yeah, there's just those two different worlds where a documentary has to stay real and feel real, all at the same time. You're still manufacturing and adding sound to several shots that just didn't have it, and versus narrative where it has all the dialogue and you have the gist of the story, and then you're just shaping uh, all of the soundscape around that dialogue. So it's a very very different approach when you're going into both. There's some sound mixers that just do documentary. There's some sound mixers that just do narrative, and then there's kind of the blend. Like
Mm.
that's kind of what I do. But it also helps because when I teach it to my students, I do show them the differences. In part of our sound two classes, they do mix a short film that's narrative, and then they go into sound editing and sound timing, and then I show them a documentary where it's hey, there's just interviews, you got to shape the rest of it. And
Mm.
the same thing goes with animation as well. Same thing with animated movies. You just have the dialogue, and you have to create the entire soundscape or the sound atmosphere from scratch completely. But still, I feel like even animated films today try to sound as real as possible.
Yeah. And that's interesting that you bring up all those different documentary narrative and animation. And I wonder, especially when it comes to teaching at New Mexico State, I wonder what are some of the main hull points that you're trying to encapsulate over a 4-year program. So like, for example, what are some of the main things that what is the timeline of like teaching sound from freshman to senior year and what is sprinkled throughout?
Well, actually, most film schools don't really have sound as like you just go to this school for sound.
Mm,
Um, you kind of go for all sorts of things. You go for directing, you go for writing, you go for producing, cinematography, editing. So my contribution to that is just part of the process. So all the students are required to take sound one. It's the first sound class we have, and it's to familiarize them with both production and post sound. But then as you go on, I have a sound two class, which is all post production. It's Pro Tools and going way heavier into post production, and then I have sound three, well, which is kind of like a directed studies. Like that one, I only get maybe like, if I'm lucky, somewhere between 1 to 3 students a
mm,
semester that are like they want to continue their education in sound, and most of that has to do with just resources. Like that's where I start to teach them 5.1 mixing and a lot of other elements, and then same thing for location sound. We go back to location sound, and I try to have them uh, do sound in one project and then do it in post, or do more 5.1 posts. It just kind of depends. I try to tailor that class specifically to the level that they want to learn, because I have different students who want to just focus on location sound, like production sound, like being on the set, working with people, getting dialogue, all that stuff. They just want to focus on that. And then I have students who, want to learn all of these tools so that they can shape and fix dialogue and create, documentary and narrative movies. So that's kind of how we tailor it. But again,
mm,
it's an overall thing. I mean, you maybe have with sound with me, you maybe only have maybe a year and a half
mm,
with me out of those 4 years. But then everything else, you still have cinematography one, two, and three. You have directing one and two, producing, editing one and two. Oh wait, that's just cinematography. Oh, now we have a production design class. Again,
mm,
so we try to get the students in a well-rounded place so that they know what every position is, because part of that is, especially nowadays, because it's so competitive. I always tell students, if you can have a foot in the production side and the post production side, then you'll always work. Like, so if you're a production designer by day and an editor by night. That's always a good combination to have. Directors are also sometimes editors, producers are sometimes cinematographers. So like, it's always good that you're able to keep a foot in both camps. And that's why it kind of works for me. Not only do I produce and direct and write my own stuff, but then location sound is something that everyone always needs. And then usually when it's done from there, I always ask them, well, what are you doing for post? And they kind of don't know. And I'm like, well, then this is where I fill in that hole as well. So it kind of works out in a way that, it keeps me busy, but it also keeps them aware that, yeah, you need to be thinking about, pre, pro, and post.
mm.
Those are the 3 stages of it. So, yeah, I mean, that's really what we try to communicate, and we try to make sure that everyone kind of comes out like knowing where they want to go. And
Yeah.
again, most of the professors like myself, we offer more tailored stuff. So like directed study, they can stick with us for longer if they want to, and we teach them more and more. Like I have a student right now who, this is actually her 4th semester with me. She did a sound one, sound two, and then did directed studies with me, which is technically sound three. But now she's doing it again, and now she wants to do more, and we're like now we're diving into AI repair for dialogue. We're looking into how to make ADR sound more things. So that's why it's like we're focusing on more things specifically that normally most students wouldn't go down the rabbit hole. So that's why it's like we're going very, very far into the rabbit hole of like, okay, well, this is the world of post sound. And even she's discovering like, whoa, I had no idea this is like all the stuff that goes into it. So I'm like, I know. And there's stuff even that I've kind of reached where I'm like, hey, I think we've gone deep enough.
Yeah.
There's there's the Titanic. We don't need to go touch it. but uh but yeah, I mean that's with any given thing, with just the way technology has changed.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too, going to film school and then also teaching film now at a university. And I have to ask, what are some of the main lessons that you've kind of kept in your mind from going to film school at the University of Texas?
um Well, when I was at UT Austin, we were at the precipice, I guess is the right word, uh, when everything was kind of going digital.
Mm.
So people still filmed their thesis films and everything on film, 16 millimeter, 8 millimeter. And so you really had to think about your composition and your shots. You had to rehearse. You had to make sure that all the elements were correct. Versus now with digital, like I think by the time I had left or once I graduated from the program, I think that's about the time like the 5D Mark II came out, and that revolutionized everything with DSLR filmmaking. So it's like everything I had learned. It's like, okay, so jumping straight into this. And then after that, the first Red One came out, I think in 2008, 2009. And that was a whole unique experience to learn. So that's the other thing too, is that technology is going to continue to change and change. And even now, I remember, I think it was like last year or 2 years ago, we were on a commercial shoot with AT&T, and they had Canon C300s, Mark IIIs, and everything was filmed vertically. And we asked, why are you guys doing that? And they said, oh, well, this whole thing's just going to be for Instagram. I was like,
Mm.
really? Like, okay, I feel like it's kind of a waste, but all right. Yeah. And so they didn't even, I thought they were going to do a commercial that then they would like crop into, but they said
Yeah.
specific content that is going to be this. So the caves that they had like would always turn the camera this way, and they always filmed like this. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And that's just stuff that we never even like. I never even thought I would ever see a day like that, in
Yeah.
school, and so that's why like so much has changed the way we consume media. I mean, you know, smartphones, iPads, this is all stuff that didn't exist. I always remind my students, I'm like, you guys know that like the smartphones that you guys have in your hands came out, like the very first one came out in like 2007, 2008, the first Apple iPhone. Like
Mm.
this isn't even 20 years old. And like to me, it's been this gigantic leap, and that's kind of I always remind my students too, like you guys live in a world where Google has always existed. You live in a world where YouTube has always existed. That wasn't the case when I was growing up. That it's like we couldn't fathom that. And now that it's changed and now that it's here, that's why you no longer, I feel like people aren't really going to film school to make movies. They go to film school to um, generate content. As
Yeah.
that's what it
Yeah.
is. Everyone needs content. So that's more what it is. And that's why I feel like there are more TV shows now, like, with Netflix and everything like that. So that's why, like, I feel like movies, they're still there, but it's a lot of the older generation that's kind of keeping the industry alive. What's going to happen when people like, and again, I'm not trying to be like, depressing about it, but it's like, what's going to happen when directors like Scorsese, Tarantino, Spielberg, Zemeckis, what's going to happen when all of these filmmakers are no longer here? Are like who's going to rise up as the new generation of filmmakers, or are they even going to have that kind of experience? So yeah, it's a as I mentioned, my high school thing, as Adolph Huxley put it, it's a brave new world out there.
Mm. It is, and I genuinely have to agree. I have no idea how it will be because I have to completely agree. I think I've seen even here a lot of people go to film school to make content, social media, which is fine, but it's just interesting how that is where most people have their focus, which doesn't surprise me as that's where media and video has gone. But it's interesting of how maybe there's a less sense on the creative narrative side and more on like the media because I think there's a difference between film and media.
Actually, that is something interesting. Like at where I teach at New Mexico State University, it's called a digital filmmaking. Digital filmmaking is the name of
Mm,
the degree, but then at the University of Texas at El Paso, it's called digital media production. Like they don't
mm,
even put the word film in there. Uh,
yeah,
Try to, but that's not a bad thing. It's just, but like when they focus on media, they're also doing radio, podcasts. Like it's any type of form of technological communication. So and that's why you have to be so versatile. And the reason audio is the same thing. It's like how many times have you listened to a podcast with bad audio?
yeah,
You know, yeah, it's like it takes you out of it. You're like, do I want to listen to this? It's gonna hurt my ears. I've always told that to a friend of mine. He has his own like podcast, and I'm like, dude, I don't know how you listen to yourself because like I can barely hear you, and everyone's making noise, and everyone's far away from the mic. It's just not professional. Um,
yeah.
And but even now, like podcasts that are out on YouTube with all these like famous, comedians or people or whatever, it's like again, take away the picture and you still have a show.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the thing now, that you're right, that we go to school to figure out how we're going to be, I don't know, the next generation of influencers instead of filmmakers.
Yeah, no, I could totally see that happening, and I wonder if you see it also sometimes outside of school, maybe in the film festival scene. You know, you are the artistic director for the El Paso Film Festival, and I wonder like how also you've seen film festivals change over time, especially in this new world of media and content.
Well, I mean, film festivals actually are still pretty traditional.
Mm,
We still follow documentary features, narrative shorts, documentary shorts. Like we all follow the short film and the feature film rules of the Academy. So that hasn't really changed. Like, our festival doesn't do. Here, I'll tell you something controversial. Our festival doesn't have a music video category.
mm,
Uh, the reason for that is because I unfortunately am part of the stance that says music videos are not films. Like,
mm,
you can kind of make them to it, but I have also, taught, like, we have a whole thing in editing, in the editing class. We discuss All Too Well by Taylor Swift, and we talk about why does this music video work as a movie, and we kind of dissect it that way. But yeah, that's something that we don't have, because again, that's the traditional part of us. We don't have like, oh, give us your best 1 minute Instagram video, or
mm,
your pitch for your commercial, or anything like that. Like we don't do that. So we stick to very traditional means of, this is what a movie is, and you're going to sit in a movie theater and watch a movie. You're
yeah.
not going to by your phone. You're not doing this while you're watching Netflix. So, but what's really changing in our festival circuit is now, is our filmmakers going to be allowed to use AI generative content? Are we going
Mm,
to allow that? It's like, like let's say an independent filmmaker doesn't have the budget to finish a movie, and they finish it with generative AI, and then they give it to us, and then we're like, oh, this is cool. But they say, yeah, we used AI. And we're like, ooh, I don't know. Like, that's kind of the weird thing too. I feel like that's going to be the next big fight is, was this made by flesh and blood human beings, or was this made by AI? And do we still consider it part of the festival landscape?
mm.
So again, the definition of what is a movie, I feel like, is going to start coming into question, because but maybe some people won't care. Like when they make, I think there's some companies working on like the first AI animation feature film right now. So I'm curious to see what it's going to be like. But you know, I don't know. Are people going to like this, or are they not going to like it? And we're going to
Mm.
see how things go.
Yeah, I have no idea how they could go because I think some people genuinely don't care and it's still entertainment to be consumed, but I think a big part of it is looking behind the curtain at the people who want to make things and say, well, I don't think it should count because there's not a physical human being doing the work, which is a good argument, but it still is this weird point to where you can think that, but AI can still do everything that you could do to a point. So it's interesting. And
Well, also AI can be used to pitch movies now. Like you can
mm,
just, if you're smart enough to write your log line, first part of your script, and you write out all your characters, and then describe it to generative AI, it can create like a Canvas presentation or a PowerPoint
mm,
presentation where it shows you, okay, here are the concepts of what we have. Here's like main character, the protagonist, the antagonist, the supporting characters. Like, it can help pitch things. But again, same thing. It's like, but is it real, or are people going to get on board with it, or do we see it and say, oh, this is a good concept, let's make it real?
yeah,
So again, I feel like, and that's something too that are, I'm starting to find out, like, most of my students like aren't don't like AI,
yeah.
especially because of the ecological impact it has. But I wonder when they graduate, or 5 years down the line, I'm like, well, hey guys, that's going to be uh, a very marketable skill to have. Even now, and as I was mentioning, in post production sound, we do use AI tools to repair audio.
Mm,
because a lot of times on productions, um, dialogue gets damaged or it's not recorded right or anything like that. And the thing is that what AI is doing is starting to cut out costs, because the most costly thing that people don't realize in a movie is when they say, "Oh, it's fine, we'll ADR it in post."
Yeah.
And they don't realize, guys, that's way more expensive than just getting it right on a film set. Because when you get it right on a film set, you don't have to do that work. If you have to call the director, call the actor or actress, rent the studio time, get the editor, put it down. Like I've done so many ADR sessions in post production that like I realized, guys, you could have just gotten this right. We've been here for 2.5 hours doing 5 lines for one scene because the actor cannot it cannot reimagine themselves and cannot give the same performance as they did when they were on set, because again, when you're on set, they're actually by the street, in the sidewalk, like they're around a real environment, so they act very differently. But then bring them into an air conditioned studio, and they're gonna just be like, "Oh yeah," like they feel like they're there, but then I'm listening to the performance and I'm listening to their to the performance that's on location. And then I listen to it here, and I'm like, "Yo, this isn't matching at all. Your emotion's completely off." And sometimes the directors can't discern that, but because I've done so many sessions, I'm like, "Hey, try this." I even told him like there was one where he was walking and he had the ADR line. We're like, dude, go take like a lap or two, get winded, and then come and do the line again, because by that time it was take 4 and you were already like breathing hard. So you need to give us that emotion again. But again, so the reason I'm getting to that is that because with AI, we're now repairing the bad audio, so we don't have to do that. We don't have to
Yeah.
pay for the actor's time, the director's time, the studio time. A lot of it has to do with timing. So to filmmakers, it's more of, or especially to producers, they're like, "Hey, can we fix that without having to call everyone and spend all this money?" Oh, cool, the AI fixed it. Great, awesome. And then they'll see it. The actors will see it and be like, "Oh, that's great. They got the performance on the day." It's like, nope, we didn't. We just fixed it. So
Yeah.
that's what I mean is that marketable, being able to understand what AI can do and say that, oh, I have the skills with the assistance of AI to fix audio or a dialogue. But that's the thing too, is that it's this whole philosophy that even now I'm teaching students where like there's a possibility that you guys got to treat AI as a co-pilot and not the autopilot.
Yeah.
But a lot of times that's what people want to do. It's just, oh, well, just throw it into the AI and it'll fix it. It's like, no, guys, it's not that. We have to be able to discern too, because we've done that before where we've cranked it, the repair pretty high, and then the actor will hear it and be like, yo, that's not my voice. It's like
Yeah.
you manipulated it just a little too much. And we're like, okay, thanks for letting us know. We need an ADR session because this is like we're not able to make that repair then. So, but that's what I mean is that like that will eventually come soon. It's just going to get better and better. But I feel like that's where it's going to be when it comes to movies. It's to just speed things up and cut costs. So, I mean, yeah, that isn't that the way the world works. It's just do it faster, do it cheaper.
Yeah, and I also think it is a interesting back and forth because I do believe that it can be a great tool, especially within even some. It's even built into some editing softwares now. It just has a built-in audio repair tool, and
Yeah, like Adobe Premiere Pro has that, but I'm not like sold on it. It's like and the thing is that there are people out there who are just like, oh yeah, Premiere's got this thing now, and I've listened to it, and I'm like, guys, that sucks,
yeah,
but they don't have the ear for that. So that's part of the education of sound is, do
yeah,
you have the ear to know when you've over processed your audio, or especially your dialogue? You've added too much stuff and it just no longer sounds natural. So being able to discern that is part of the human experience, and it's something that students I feel have to learn.
yeah. I actually agree with that, and also I think. To come back just a little bit what we were saying is that I think it's a great tool, but I think also a lot of times when people get into the art of filmmaking, a lot of people might fall into it as a crutch, and that's where it becomes a problem, you know?
Well, if I can say crutch here, I'll give you. You're a film student, right?
I
And you're
am.
okay. How many times is everyone fighting the boom operator on the film set?
Oh, all
Hey,
the time.
shadows. Hey, you do this. Hey, you're in the way. Guess what, guys? Without that person, and if you say, well, let's just use the lavalier mics,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you can, but that's not how sound works. Sound
Mm.
travels up, and you're putting the mic here. Like I go to this whole thing in my sound classes about like, and that's why movies from the 80s and 90s are so different because they were all heavily reliant on boom mics, and that's what records the performance. And but again, people thinking like, oh, we'll just throw the wires on, and then we'll just throw it in the Premiere and it'll clean it up and do all this stuff. It's like, oh man, that's not, you're not going to get good sound that way. But again, do people care, or do they just feel like, ah, it's good enough? So there's this level of sophistication. It's kind of like, you know, here, I'll give you an example. Have you ever colored your own movies? Like, shoot and log and you color and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, pretend it's like, oh, Premiere's got this look. Cool. Just drop it in and that's it. You're done. It's like, no, come on. There's
Yeah.
so much more finessing that goes into color. And it's the same way with sound. We call it sweetening. You have to be able, just like your eyes have to discern, hey, that's a good look for my movie, or no, that looks terrible. It's the same way with sound. It's, hey, is this good for the movie? Does it make it sound the way it's supposed to, or does it sound terrible? So it's the
Yeah.
same way. It's just our senses being overloaded. I feel like people just they'll say, oh, I'll just slap an Instagram filter on it and call it a day.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's just one of those things that, technology has just become so advanced, and especially with people growing up, especially with younger people growing up, like my age, and I get it. We're so used to, maybe having presets that can do a majority of the work for you, and we're so used to that a lot of people find it hard to argue to do the actual maybe more difficult work. But I think that's where you get fine-tuned to actually make a good piece of film. And I also wonder, as time will go on, I wonder your thoughts on this as well, where softwares where softwares will end up, because we have editing softwares who already have AI tools implemented that you just drop down into your video and audio track, and we also have, audio editing softwares that can just generate AI. I wonder where these softwares that everyone will be using, where they will end up.
Well, that's why I was mentioning co-pilot versus autopilot. That's the
Mm,
thing, is that it's gonna, like, there's still gonna be a human behind it. um, and so you're right, we don't know where it's going to go, but it's all going to depend on the people who learn how to use it and learn how to shape it, because that will start to define the way we consume media in the next 10 years. So yeah, and even now as a professor, I may have to change my entire teaching philosophy in the next several years with, if AI becomes that dominant. It's more like, okay, guys, this is how things are no longer done that way.
yeah,
Now they're done this way, and this is what we have to adapt to. So no, and that's kind of the really good thing about why I enjoy being a professor as well, is that now I'm teaching everyone that what I've learned, but at the same time I'm also learning that same new technology with them, and also by being on production sets and doing post production on movies, I'm starting to see where the industry is also going. So in a way, it kind
yeah,
of gives them an idea of like, hey guys, when you graduate, here's where the jobs are.
yeah,
Like that's why we always say with sound, I feel like you always have work,
yeah,
because no one likes to do it, and
yeah,
especially production sound, when you're on set, it's labor intensive. You got to hold the boom up, in your arms 10, 12 hours a day, and it's exhausting. And then in production, in post production, you know, after a while, you'll have fatigue with your ears. Like I've done posts for like, for a while now, and there have been times where I'm like, I need a break. Like I feel like I feel like everything sounds right, but I don't know. I need my ears to rest for a second, just like our
yeah,
eyes do if we're trying to color. So, but again, that's also, I feel like that's also why people want to go, use AI and go faster, cheaper, because humans need to rest. We need to reflect. We need to recalibrate, because that's also kind of another thing too. Anytime we do an approach, I'm sure you've done this too, where you've colored a movie, you go back to, you're like, okay, that's enough for today. And then you come back and you're like, I don't like the way I colored this. Let me redo it, or let me switch this up. And it's the same thing with me for post production. I'll mix a scene and I'll have everything, and then I go back and I'm like, you know, maybe that explosion's a little too much. Maybe I
yeah,
should. And you start to second guess yourself, but you start to tweak and do everything. And that's what sometimes, companies are like, stop touching it. It's like,
yeah.
they always say good art is never finished, it's only abandoned.
Yeah.
So at some point we're just like, okay, I think this is good. And if
Yeah.
there's major problems, we'll go ahead and fix them.
Yeah, I mean, you can always keep working on stuff. I've just learned to accept that you will always have new ideas or second guesses and new things to add. And but one thing that you talked about a little bit earlier that I want to get into as we start to wind down here is your unique position of being in the business of filmmaking, but also being an educator. And I kind of want you to talk about how what led you to start teaching at New Mexico State and how and also the balance of being a filmmaker in the business and also being a filmmaking educator.
Well, originally I got involved so originally I had a production company here with my brother early on when we graduated from UT Austin, and I got involved with the University of Texas at El Paso. They had an internship program, and since we were a production company, I started to kind of take on interns, but I would only do like one a semester. So think of it like that's kind of where the directed studies was born. Uh,
Hmm.
and I did that for several years, and then I just kind of stopped doing it for a while, and then right after the pandemic, and of course this is of course doing all these movies, production, post, whatever, and then but by that time, I had known a few colleagues over at New Mexico State, and they reached out to me and said, "Hey, our the person who teaches sound retired. Can you come in as an adjunct? We've heard of your career. We've been seeing the stuff you do. Um, would you like to try it?" And I said, "Yeah, let's. Why not?" And at that time, because that was around the time when the strikes were all happening, and I was like, "Yeah, why not?" Like just in case, because I've been surviving freelance for several years, but then I'm like, I started to notice like things started to go away, and I'm like, "Yeah, let's try it," and then I did, and then I had a really good first year. I taught two classes, so I taught two sound classes, and then and then after that, they offered me a visiting line position. So like I was offered like more full time, and I was like, oh, okay, like that's cool. And then as I did that one, then another position opened up as main faculty, and I went ahead and applied to that one, and they already had like the feedback from students and me teaching, and they saw my coursework and all that stuff, and they said, hey, you're the perfect fit for this, and you're going to be teaching more sound classes, but also help out with producing, help out with editing, help out with the intro class. And I said, okay, yeah, this is, and it's all basic stuff about the film industry. And I was like, okay, this looks good so far. And then, yeah, so I've been at that job for I think it's my second year as official faculty.
Hmm.
So yeah, I kind of just found that. But of course, I mean, teaching runs in the veins. My mom was a first grade bilingual teacher,
Yeah.
and but yeah, it was something I discovered, and even now, like I feel like really honed my knowledge of sound, because it's different when you've collected all of this knowledge, but then when you have to like structure it into a course so that students like you can consume it and consume it in a way that you understand it, is something that I found like the new challenge to be. It's like, okay, how can I keep their attention, and am I communicating the correct vocabulary? Am I communicating the right terms of, and that's why I always do so many comparisons. Like I try to compare, coloring versus music versus all sorts of different things. It's like, guys, this is all around us. So by putting it in terms that they can understand is how they consume it. That's how they understand and learn sound in the filmmaking process. But also in real life, I always tell people, hey, when you're on the location scout and you're looking for a place, close your eyes and just listen to the location for like 1 minute. Just listen to it and what's around you. And okay, is there a lot of traffic? Are there dogs barking? Is it a neighborhood? Lawnmowers? It's like, what are you hearing? Because those eventually translate into obstacles, which could affect your movie. Like, are you by the airport? Like little things. The location may look great, but you're going to be hearing a plane every like 5-10 minutes, and you're doing a western. Yeah, that's going to be a challenge. So you have to kind of take that into consideration. So I hope that answers your question. I know that was a little long-winded on how I got into.
No, it's all good. It's interesting, how how much filmmaking has become a more accessible career to learn. It's interesting. I can only speculate for my age, but I can imagine that film was a more difficult thing to go to school for, maybe in the 1980s and 1990s, and maybe even the 2000s, especially with things going from analog film to digital. And one last thing I wanted to ask before we're done today is, when students come to learn filmmaking, let's say even, specifically with your experience at New Mexico State, what are some of the main things that they should take away from filmmaking as a whole, and maybe for those who actually want to have a career within sound in filmmaking?
Hmm. Let's see, that's always a tough one because every student is different. I always say you get back what you put in.
Hmm.
So, but when it comes to what we want them to walk away with, I mean, we want them to walk away being creative, or to think critically and creatively. That's the other thing too. Is I what I always tell my students is, don't think that you can't use this degree in any other part of your life. Don't think that just because you don't become a filmmaker doesn't mean you won't use this degree. What we show you how to do in this film school or at New Mexico State, I feel, is um, we show you how to think critically. We show you how to think creatively. We show you how to think when you don't have all of the resources and elements. We try to teach you how to work with a team. That's the other thing too, is that no matter what job you go into these days, you're working with a team. You have a manager, you have a boss, like everyone higher up. But it's the same thing in the film industry. If you're walking in and you're the assistant camera, okay, you answer to the cinematographer works with the director works with the producers, then there's the executive producers and the studio head. So it's the same thing.
Mhm.
You're going to end up in those places. But the biggest thing that I feel is a big advantage of just this degree is you learn how to communicate. You learn how to work with people. You learn how to respect people. You learn how to manage a situation. I always tell producers there, and this is just to borrow it for fun, but I always tell them, like, I had a student ask me, like, well, what do I do as a producer? I was like, you're kind of a glorified cheerleader, and then you have to throw on the firefighter hat when shit hits the fan.
Yeah.
So, like, oh, you lost the location, or oh, the lunch order got wrong. It's like you got to start thinking creatively. So that's why I feel that what students can walk out with is, again, we want them to be the next generation of directors, producers. We want them to go all the way out there. And a lot of them do. A lot of we There's been a lot of alumni that have really, really gone and done some amazing things. And I've actually found that out too with the El Paso Film Festival. I mean, the whole reason I created this festival was to kind of be a beacon for filmmakers. This is barely our 8th year, and finding filmmakers who said, "Oh, I left El Paso and I went to Los Angeles, or I went to New York, or I went to, wherever." It's always nice to see them come back, but see them making their movies and showing the quality that they have. And that's kind of what we do, is we network everyone. We say, hey, well, the way you collaborate is by meeting new people. So we always say, go to a film festival, watch the movies. One's going to talk to you. One's going to be like, hey, I love that movie. Oh, the filmmaker's here. I need to go talk to them. I want to work on their next movie. And
Hmm.
that's what we use it for. So that's kind of another thing too. It's creating also in filmmaking, the social construct. It's being sociable. It's being not afraid to shake someone's hand and say, oh, I loved your movie, or how can I help? What can I do to be involved? And that's how friendships and bonds are born. So, and again, even if someone were to go to film school and not continue uh, their degree, because a lot of times some filmmakers do go to school and they're like, oh, I'm not even using my degree. Actually, you are. You just
Yeah.
don't realize how you're using it. But yeah, this is what's so unique about this degree, is that you have to learn how to work with everyone else.
Yeah, it's so interesting too, and that's a really good thing you bring up, because I think a lot of people go into film school thinking that maybe they could do things on their own, but you just can't. It's impossible. And I think that's a really good point, that you just have to learn how to work with people, because if, not even if you decide to continue a career in filmmaking, you will always be working with people, and it will always be a team effort. But I just want to say thank you, Carlos, for coming on here and talk to me. It was really great.
Sure. Thank
Yeah.
you. So
Yeah.
just Curiosity, are you showing this to your class, or is this just for you? Or
This is just really for me. I started going to film school last year. Um I went for music and I realized that I can't read sheet music and switched my
well,
degree to film.
that's okay. I can't either. I when I played the piano growing up, I did it all by memorization and sound. Like
Yeah.
how I did it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I originally wanted to be a film composer. I learned all the DAWs and started to really utilize my ears. I always was a sound individual. But then after I couldn't pass my music classes because I couldn't read sheet music, I just like, well, the next best thing I do is do film. And film school's been great, and I kind of realized that this is such an interesting career and degree path that not only relates to film, but a bunch of other things. I find my film degree connecting to so many other things in the world. So I've just been searching around the internet for cool and interesting people around the world that are in the film business, maybe not in the film business, but just people I'd want to talk to. And New Mexico holds a very special place in my heart. My family's from New Mexico. I was not born in New Mexico, but it's a cool place, and I thought you were a really cool person to talk to, and also I just think start with how accessible filmmaking is now within higher education. There are so many well-rounded individuals that have such a good insight on the industry, and I would just like to hear what they want to say. So it's
Yeah,
really just for me. It's just on YouTube and it's
I,
just
I
fun.
hope it helps. But yeah, no, if it's on YouTube, send it over. I'll share it.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, the next time the way it works is that film school is busy. I find myself always being swamped with work, and so what I do is that I often record episodes months in advance to when I often release them. So I release one every month, and
Sure.
that's kind of my schedule. And so the ones I've recorded now within the last month or so are probably come out in January or February of this upcoming year. But um, when I do edit them and when they do get released, I always send an email to whoever it was, like, "Hey, our episode finally came out. Thanks for talking to me." And then you can use it for whatever, if just for fun. But thank you, Carlos. I really do appreciate it.
Sure, man. Happy to
Yeah.
help.
All right, I'm gonna head out of here. I'm gonna keep on going with my day and have a good one. Thanks for coming on to here. Seriously, I do
All
really
right,
appreciate it.
thanks, Broden.
All right, have a good one. Thank you.
You. Bye.
Bye.